This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, everybody on their best behavior. Okay, so when we deal with the sequence of brachot, the order of brachot, so there are two main situations that we need to discuss, and each one is going to have its own separate rules of hakdama, of precedence. One situation that we're going to face is when we have two foods of the same blessing. You've got an apple and an orange. You've got a date and you've got a pomegranate, both of which are borei pri ha'etz. You've got a watermelon and a cucumber, both of which are borei pri ha'adama. Now, if you sit down to a salad and that salad has tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and lettuce and onion, right? So that's a little bit less of an issue. So there, of course, you're only going to be making one bracha, one borei pri ha'adama, and that's going to cover the entire salad. So that's a little bit easier because there you're taking one spoonful, which has in it probably tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, lettuce, and whatever else you have there, and you make your bracha and you eat it. So that's simple. But let's say I've got, like I said before, an apple and an orange, a melon and a tomato, and I'm not eating a spoonful of melon tomato, right? So there, the question is, which one should I make the bracha? There, I'll make a bracha on one, and that will cover all the other borei pri. I make my one borei pri ha'etz, and that covers all the fruits of the tree, all the fruits that grow on trees. I make one borei pri ha'adama, and that covers all of the fruits or vegetables that grow on the ground. So there the question is going to be, which one should I make the bracha on? That's one issue that we have over here. A second issue that will come up is, hi Leah, good to see you. A second issue that comes up is, let's say I've got a borei pri ha'etz and a borei pri ha'adama. So it's different brachot. So I need to make two blessings. So there the question is not which one do I make it on to cover the other. There the issue is, what is the order of the brachot that I should make? Which one should I do first? Which one should I do second? So those are the two instances where we have to discuss the sequence of the brachot, which is chapter 5, the proper sequence of brachot, meaning which one should you do to cover the others when they are the same bracha, and which one should you do first when they are different brachot. Okay, so if you take a look on, well, we'll see. There are different factors that go into this. So on page 153, we have the factor of the bracha itself, meaning regardless of the food, which type of food it is, certain brachot are considered more important and will take precedence over the other brachot. And we discussed last time, what will determine the importance of a bracha itself? What did we say last time around, my friends? What will determine the importance of the bracha itself?
If it's bread or wine?
Yes. But that's an example, Rose. But what is the rule? What is the criterion? Right? So it's a difference between saying, Daryl, you're looking good tonight, to saying, Daryl, I really like that sweater.
The more specific,
a really nice sweater.
The more specific the bracha, the greater.
Exactly. How specific is the bracha. And therefore, right, if you look on the bottom of 153, the sequence in which brachot are recited follow the degree of their specificity. As follows: hamotzi, what we make on bread, that precedes all brachot. Number 2 on the bottom of 153, mizonot. Number 3, as we turn to page 154, is ha-gafen or ha-gefen. Number 4 is ha'etz or ha'adama. We'll discuss that, right? There we discussed which one is more specific. Of eitz and adama, which one is more specific, my friends?
Ha'etz is more specific.
Ha'etz is more specific, good. However, the difference between the two is pretty minimal. So that will not always carry the day. And lastly, we have the least specific, shahakol, right? Shahakol is the cover-all that everything is comes about through the will of God. Now, it's interesting. Shahakol, is it nihiyeh bidvaro or nihiyah bidvaro? And both are actually correct. If you look in one siddur, it'll say Shahakol nihiyeh bidvaro. Another siddur will say Shahakol nihiyah bidvaro. Right? It could be the 3 dots, the nihiyeh, S sound like an egg, 3 dots, or the comets, which is nihiyah. Okay, either one is correct. So one factor that we need to look at is the bracha itself. Which brachot are considered to be more specific and therefore are giving greater honor to Hashem? The next category we need to look at is the food itself. Okay? And when it comes to the food itself, there is a concept known as, based on a pasuk, based on a verse, the 7 species. What are the 7 species, my friends? So the land, but in general, more before we get to listing them, the 7 species is God praises the land of Israel. And he praises the land of Israel by listing the wonderful things that grow there. And it says, Eretz chita usora, a land of wheat and barley, the gefen, grapes, te'ena, the rimon, te'ena of figs, rimon of pomegranates, Eretz zeit shemen udvash, a land of olive oil and dvash, honey. But the honey that the pasuk refers to is not bees' honey, but rather the honey that the pasuk refers to is date honey. Okay? So therefore the dvash actually is a reference to dates. Okay. So these are the 7 species that the land of Israel is praised. Now, we look at the order. So therefore, if something is one of these 7 species, then I'm not sure. Does everybody else hear me well? Okay, I think it's your connection, Leah. Okay, so if one fruit is from the 7 species, a date as opposed to an orange, right? A pomegranate as opposed to an apple, a grape as opposed to a kiwi. So in all of those situations, the one that is part of the meaning of the 7 species is more important than the other fruits. Okay. So there too, we would want to make a blessing over that before over the orange. That's another factor that we have at play. Now, I was just comparing those that are part of the 7 species and those that are not part of the 7 species. But let's say they're both part of the 7 species. Is there any order of preference over there? So take a look at the very bottom of 154, the very last sentence. Furthermore, since the Torah listed these fruits in this particular order, we may infer that this is the order of their importance. So at first glance, we'd say, okay, wheat is number 1, dates are number 7, right? Because honey, the last one, is dates. However, it can't simply be that simple, right? We always have to make it complicated. However, since the Torah repeated the word land, Eretz, Eretz, a land of Chita, Seora, Gevin, Te'ena, Rimon, Eretz, a land, Zeit Shemen, of olive oil and honey. Chazal, the sages assumed, that a new sequence is started after the second word, Eretz. Accordingly, dates precede grapes. Why is that? Because grapes are number 3 after the first mention of the word land, right? As dates are second from the word Eretz, where grapes are third from the word Eretz. Okay, so let's look at the rules now. A fruit of one of the 7 species that we understand takes precedence over a fruit not among the 7 species, right? So a date will be ahead of an orange. B, when both fruits are among the 7 species, the order follows the order as they are listed in the Torah. So it's wheat, barley, spelt, rye, oats, the 5 grains, okay? Olives, dates, grapes, raisins or wine, figs, pomegranates. So when it comes to hamotzi, in other words, so let's say I've got some wheat bread and I have barley bread, both of which require hamotzi. Which will I make the hamotzi on?
The wheat.
On the wheat, because that's listed first. If I'm eating fruits and I've got some dates and some grapes, so I need to make one borei pri ha'etz, I would make it on the dates before the grapes, on the figs before the pomegranates, right? On the grapes, right? So then we'd follow that order of olives, dates, grapes, figs, pomegranates. It's got to be a good ODGFP way of remembering that. If someone comes up with it, please share it with the group. What do they call those things when you send like this constant like a picture of a guy going on the internet? What's it called?
A meme or a GIF? A GIF?
Oh yeah, a GIF. It's GIF?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's not a GFP. That won't help us. Okay. Anyhow. All right. C. The 7, okay, that we're not going to go into now. Okay, as we mentioned before, drinks are always shahako, right? Except for grape juice, right? But orange juice, date juice, right? So the 7 species will lose their importance once they are broken down into a juice. So when we're looking at the food itself, one factor is 7 species. Secondly is a complete fruit. If I have a whole apple or a whole grape, and I have a slice of a a slice of an apple and a whole grape, well, that's not a well. Let's keep them both non-seven species. So I have a slice of an apple and I have a whole kiwi, a whole cherry, right? So then the importance goes to the one that is whole, that is shalem. That is another factor of importance. Okay? And thirdly, if I have a shahakol that is a food and a shahakol that is a drink, then the food takes precedence over the drink. Okay? These are all just factors that need to go into our final decision. Okay? But let's just understand all these factors that are at play. Yes, Leah.
I also heard, correct me if I'm wrong, it could be like any of the food that you want to eat most. You say
Good.
that,
Yes.
Bracha?
Yes. A third factor on page 156 is the preference, right? You really enjoy bananas. Okay, bananas are your favorite. So that's also going to be a factor in which one goes first. Okay, so on page 157, we have the practical application. So let's see that. The order of precedence established by our poskim. What are poskim again, my friends?
The
Authority.
leaders of halakha.
Yes, the leaders of halacha, right? The poskim, lifsok means to decide, to determine. So number one is, A is the 7 species. Okay? That is the most important factor. So even though I love bananas, as my grandchildren will testify, even though I love bananas, if I've got a banana, what blessing do we make on banana? Adama. So it's not a great example then, because any adamas amongst the 7 species. But I also love my clementines. So even though I love my clementines, if I have a clementine and I have a date in front of me, I will make the bracha even if the date is cut, is not whole, and the clementine is whole. So the clementine is whole and the date is not. And I love my clementine more than I love my dates. It doesn't matter. If it's from the 7 species, that is the one you should make your bracha on. That trumps what you like the most. That trumps whether it is shalem or not.
So Rabbi, so
Yes.
in that scenario, would I not make a bracha on the clementine, or do I just do a second?
No, you would not make a bracha on the clementine.
Oh, okay.
As long as we'll see that later on, but as long as both of them are in front of you, on the contrary, making a bracha, repeating Borei Priya 8s on my grape, Borei Priya 8s on my date, Borei Priya 8s on my clementine, that would be a bracha she'ena tzuricha, an unnecessary bracha which we're not allowed to make, right? We have to have this reverence for our brachot, for our blessings. Okay? So in a situation where you have a number of items that are in front of you, all the same bracha, you're only allowed to make one bracha. And the question is, which of those should you make the bracha on? And the 3 competing factors are 7 species, complete, and that which I like the most. So if one of them is 7 species and the other one is not, 7 species wins.
So is there ever a case when you would make multiple brachas, or no?
If they're in front of you, you would not.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Well, the only case, we'll see it later on, the only case would be if I said, I'm not going to have the clementine. I'm just going to have the date. So there, my bracha was deliberately, specifically on the date and not on the clementine. And then I changed my mind, so then I would make another bracha. But the normal situation is you're sitting down, you've got a nice fruit platter in front of you, so you're going to make a borei pri ha'etz on one of those fruits, and a borei pri ha'adama on another one of those fruits. Which one should I choose to make the bracha on? So when it comes to the borei pri ha'etz, all those fruits of the tree, consideration number one is, are any of these from the 7 species?
Mm-hmm. If
one of them is from the 7 species, that's where I make the bracha on. If more than one are from the 7 species, then we go according to the order of the Torah, right? And that will be olives, dates, grapes, figs, and pomegranates.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
So, understood on the fruit, but if now I'm going to have wine, right? So then I must make a blessing for the wine, or better yet, the blessing for the wine should always be first. So if I'm going to have
Okay.
wine, I should do the
Yes.
wine.
So the next thing we're going to deal with, Rose, is the order of different blessings. Which one should go first? Which one should go second? So let's just put that on hold for a few moments because we're almost finished over here. Right now, the only thing we're discussing is when I have multiple items of this blessing. So I'm only making one blessing to cover those multiple items. What is the order? Which one, not the order, sorry. Which one should be chosen to make the bracha on it? The first factor is 7 species. If one of those is 7 species, that's the winner. That's where you make your bracha. If more than 1 or 7 species, the winner is whichever is earlier on that list of 7 species, right? So there the order would be you do olives before figs, you do dates before pomegranates, right, etc., etc. Olives before dates, dates before grapes, grapes before figs, figs before pomegranates, and all of those. Now, if the foods are not of the 7 species, so that's now off the table. So now we have two other factors to keep in mind. And the more important factor is whichever one is whole. So if I have a cherry and I have a clementine, even though I prefer clementines, but the clementine is already peeled and has been broken up into different pieces, whereas the cherry is complete, even though I prefer clementines over cherries, I would make the bracha on the cherry since that is shalem, that is complete. And then if I've got none of them are complete, I've got some sliced apple and sliced oranges, neither one of them is from the 7 species, neither one of them is complete. So then which would I make the bracha on? Whichever one I prefer.
Like most.
Yes, whichever one I like most, that is where I will make my bracha. So again, the order is pretty straightforward over here. 7 species, complete, preference. Okay? That is the order. Again, when I'm making one bracha over a number of items that are the same blessing, and I have to decide which one will the bracha be made on? That is the order. 7 species, complete, chaviv, preference, the one that you like. Okay. Now, as we turn to 158, now we're getting to the second area that Rose had brought up a few moments ago. And that is when I have multiple brachot in front of me, then what is the order of what is the order of the brachot that I should make? See, here we have, let's work it through. Just one second. Yes. Bread is considered to be the most important of the blessings. Bread is number one, and therefore the first blessing that you make is hamotzi. Now, normally hamotzi will preclude other blessings that one makes at the meal, but not all the other blessings. That we will get to. We touched upon this last week a little bit. Let me just, explain the concept. When you have a main food item and a supplementary food item, you make a blessing on the main and not on the supplementary. For example, there are some people, when they eat their watermelon, they like to put salt on it. Anybody do that? Yeah? It makes it sweeter. What does it do? I never quite got it, Ladero.
I don't know. It seems like it gives it a little more flavor or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, someone once did it, and I tasted it, and it really brought it to life. There was something to it.
I'm going to have to try that now.
I'm sorry?
I said I'm going to have to try that now. I've never tried that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, clearly, not a lot of salt. Yeah. Now, clearly, you're going to make your borei pri ha'adama, the fruits of the ground, on the watermelon. You're not going to make a bracha of shehakol on salt, right? Because you don't eat salt by itself. Salt is just there to spice, right? Or if I have an omelet and I put in some garlic flakes or some parsley, I don't know. Now, those are borei pri ha'adama. And the omelet is eggs. What bracha do we make on eggs?
Shehakol.
Shehakol. Even though borei pri ha'adama takes precedence over shehakol, we'll soon see, but I'm eating eggs. I make the bracha on the eggs, not on the spices. We discussed cereal and milk, right? So the cereal might be a mezonot, might be borei pri ha'adama. The milk, of course, is shehakol. I make the bracha on the cereal, and that covers the milk. So when we have a primary and a secondary, I make the bracha on the primary to the exclusion of the secondary. That's why by a bread meal, we don't make other blessings. When it comes to bread, everything else is considered to be secondary. Not just in a case where I have a sandwich and I have some tuna fish on a sandwich or egg salad on a sandwich. So therefore the bread is hamotzi and the tuna or the egg salad is shehakol, right? So there every bite is bread and is primary and secondary. But not only in such a case. I wash and I have some, and I make hamotzi, I have some bread. And now I'm having some chicken or some meat or some rice or some vegetables. Even though I'm not necessarily eating those along with my bread. I'm not necessarily dipping my bread into all that and eating that. But nevertheless, bread is of such primary importance that everything else in the meal, like the things that I just mentioned, we'll soon see there are exceptions. Everything else is considered secondary to the bread. So it's like milk and cereal. I make the bracha on the cereal, not on the milk. Once I have a bread meal, when it comes to all of those staple parts of the meal, vegetables, salads, chicken, meat, fish, all of that, drinks, with the exception of wine, everything else is considered to be secondary to the bread. So therefore I make my bracha on the bread and on the bread alone. So in the order, it's bread, then cake is number 2, mizonos, right? Made of wheat, barley, made of the 5 oats, cooked grain or cereal requiring a mizonos made of the 5 grains. So it's interesting. Something that is baked is considered of more elevated, of more importance than something that is cooked. Number 4 on the list on page 159 now is wine. Okay, E is interesting. Rice is a bit of an exception. Rice is not one of the 5 grains, and yet we make a mizonot on it. Now, this is where Pesach gets very interesting, right? According to the Sephardic custom, they eat rice on Pesach, right? Because rice it's not one of the 5 grains, it can't become leavened, right? But the Ashkenazic custom is not to eat, that rice is too close for comfort. So we don't eat rice on Pesach. So rice requires a mizonot beforehand, but has a different after blessing. We'll come to that later on. Then we have fruits of the 7 species, olives, dates, grapes, figs, pomegranates. Other fruits or vegetables requiring eitz or adama. Food requiring shahakol, and then drinks requiring shahakol. Last on the list is bracha over pleasant fragrances. And once again, that's more of a Sephardic thing than an Ashkenazic thing. We don't make, Ashkenazim don't make, the only time we actually make a blessing on fragrance commonly would be at Havdalah. Then we make the bracha over a fragrance, but otherwise not. Whereas Sephardim, under the chuppah, they'll make a bracha on a fragrance. At a house of Shiva, where they want people to make many brachot, many blessings, in memory and in honor of the deceased, they'll have different types of food and also fragrances. Okay. So that is
Rabbi
pretty.
Ciner, I have a
Yes.
quick question.
Yes.
Sorry, my connection is so bad. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Can
We
you
hear you.
Okay. Also, Sephardim, do you guys also say the bracha over fragrances at funerals, or is that just Sephardic culture?
Sephardic custom. That is Sephardic custom. Leah, we're losing you.
Mm-hmm.
We love you, Leah, but we're losing you. You're frozen. Okay, we'll get back to Leah. Okay. So, again, that order is pretty straightforward. So you're sitting down to a table, and there's some cake there, there's some olives there, there is some bananas over there, right? There is some candies over there. So the first thing you'll do is make a mezonot on the cake that's there. And that will cover any other mezonot. When it comes, the next bracha you're going to make is bori eitz. What will you make the bori pri eitz on? Which of all those fruits will you make it? That we discussed before. If you have 7 species, one of those, right? The first on the list, right? The earlier on the list, I should say, the 7 species. Otherwise, on something that is shalem, that is complete. Otherwise, on something that you like the most. Okay? And then you move on to Borei Pri Ha'adama. Okay. Now, the next part gets a little bit dicey. Borei Pri Ha'etz, as Liderel said earlier, is a bit more specific than Borei Pri Ha'adama, but it's just a bit more specific. So therefore, you don't have to make Borei Pri Ha'etz before Borei Pri Ha'adama. There are other factors to take into account. So if I really like my banana more than my clementine, then I can make my Borei Pri Ha'adama before my Borei Pri Ha'etz. Right, on page 160 now. The chaviv, the one that you really like the most, that can allow a Borei Pri Ha'adama to jump ahead of a Borei Pri Ha'etz. Okay? If I like them all the same, then the 7 species, right, would go first, meaning the 7 species could be a cooked wheat kernel is Borei Pri Ha'adama. Okay? That we'll see later on. Okay? So I would do that over an apple. Okay? The 7 species, Adama, would trump the non-7 species fruit. And then lastly, we have the complete fruit. Okay? So those are all reasons why an Adama would trump an eitz, because again, even though the eitz is more specific, it's very, very, a very slight degree of more specific. So at times, the Borei Pri Adama can trump that. Okay. The next part, chapter 6, is something that comes up often. You go into your kitchen, you go to the fruit drawer, you take out a clementine, you make it Borei Pri Ha'etz, you eat your clementine. You finish that, and now you're going to have an apple. Or now you're going to have some cherries. The same blessing. But when I made that blessing, I didn't have in mind the cherries, but it's sort of the same eating. It's the same eating session, we'll call it. So do I make another blessing on my cherries? Do I not make another blessing on my cherries? Right? So on page 166, the question is, what is included in the original bracha? Now, this is very important because it's a matter of, if I'm not supposed to make the bracha and I do, I'm saying God's name in vain. I'm making a bracha that I don't need. If I am supposed to make the bracha and I don't, I am partaking of God's gifts without acknowledging, without thanking, without showing appreciation. So this is something that comes up often, and it is confusing. Okay, so one factor is, let's look at Roman numeral 1 there on page 166. One who recites a bracha on a particular food may partake of another food requiring the same bracha if that food was present on the table at the time of the bracha. That's a simple case. So there's a bunch of fruits on the table. I take one, planning on having a clementine, delicious, make my bari priya eights, and then I think, those cherries are looking good. I'm going to have some cherries. If they were on the table at the time of the bracha, whether or not, when I made the bracha on the clementine, whether or not I was planning on having some cherries is irrelevant. It was on the table in front of me when I made my bracha. Everything on that table is covered. Okay. Now, just one second. Let's say, though, it was brought afterwards. That's where things start to get tricky, right? Like the case I said before, I went to my kitchen, opened the fridge, took out an apple, made a bar prayer eights, had the apple. Then I'm thinking, I wouldn't mind having some of those cherries, looked good. Wouldn't mind having some of those cherries, right? Or even having some of those grapes. I already made my Borei Pri Ha'etz. Do I make another one? Must I? Can't I? So there are factors that go into it, and let's work through these factors. Let's look at A. Brachas recited on food eaten as a snack. Okay? When I'm snacking, I don't necessarily keep on eating, right? Often a snack is going to be just that. I grabbed a bag of chips and I made my bracha and I ate that, right? So now, in determining the need for a new bracha, a number of factors must be considered. First of all, if I had specific intention, that's clear. Meaning, if when I took that apple or that clementine, I had in mind, I might have some of those, I'm going to have some cherries afterwards, or I had in mind that I'm making this bracha, and I wanted to include whatever I'm going to eat afterwards. I'm making a bar priya eights on my clementine, and I wanted to include any other bar priya eights that I might decide to have afterwards. That's simple. In such a case, it's certainly included. And on 168, the converse of that, if I had in mind, I'm going to have one clementine, and that's it. Nothing else. No more. I don't want to have an upset stomach. I'm just going to have one clementine, and that's it. I had a clear, exclusive intention. And then I decided, you know what? Maybe I'll have some of those grapes. Maybe I'll have some cherries. Maybe I'll have some apples. So there I definitely must make another bracha because my original intention clearly excluded everything else, right? So that's easy. If I had in mind, I wanted this to include everything else, then I don't make another bracha. If I had in mind this should not include anything else, and then I change my mind, then I clearly do need to make a bracha. The issue that comes up is when we don't have anything specific in mind, right? We amble into the kitchen, and we take some grapes, Bori Priya eights, we eat the grapes, and now we start to, well, maybe I should have some more. So when I made the Bori Priya eights on the grapes, I wasn't thinking I'm going to have more. I wasn't thinking I'm not going to have more. Like most of us, we weren't thinking. We weren't giving it all that much thought, and we just had some. So then, what, right? One way of looking at it is a person normally eats more than they planned, so it should be included. Or another way of looking at it is a snack does not necessarily go on afterwards, and therefore I would not need to. So over here on page 170, we have this idea. If either I'm going to eat more of the same food, or some of the food remains, then I don't need to make another bracha. So I had a clementine with no specific intention when I made the bracha. I decide to have another clementine, I will not make another bracha. Or I have a couple of pieces of the clementines left, haven't finished it yet, and then I pull out some cherries or some grapes or some apple, I will not make another bracha. If either I'm eating more of the same or some of the original food remains, I will not make another bracha. However, if I finish the clementine, it's gone, finished, and now I decide I want to take out some grapes, some apple, then I would need to make another bracha. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. Now, this is talking about when it is a snack. But if it's a meal, there it's going to be different. Why, my friends, would you say it's going to be different if it's a meal?
Because it's the primary entree.
But why would we say, good Rose, but let's take it a step further. Why would we say that my bracha will extend further when it's a meal than it would by a snack?
A snack you keep eating.
Actually, the other way around,
The
Ladero,
way around.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Hopping into
Yeah,
the kitchen
sorry.
for a clementine is different than sitting down at the table for a meal,
Right.
right? By the clementine, chances are I'm not going to have, I made a bracha on the clementine, that's it. Another clementine won't require a bracha. I'm still eating the clementine, it won't require a bracha on my cherries or grapes. Once I finish the clementine, I'm finished. Now I want to have grapes, another bracha. But when I'm sitting down to a meal, there I'm going to be
Eating several
partaking,
different
Right.
things.
okay? A formal meal, right, is likely to extend to more foods than one originally anticipated eating. And therefore, once at a meal, I made one borei pri ha'etz, that's going to cover all the borei pri ha'etzes, even though it wasn't in front of me, even though I finished my first borei pri ha'etz, and then it was brought out, and it's a different fruit now, there at a meal, the one borei pri ha'etz that I make will cover all subsequent borei pri ha'etzes. My one borei pri ha'adama will cover all subsequent borei pri ha'adamas.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say we're served meat and potatoes and a vegetable, and we make the blessing, but then later bread comes out after, and wine.
Yes. So in that case, one would then wash for the bread. But ideally, if there's going to be bread at the meal, one should start with that. If there's going to be bread at the meal, then one should start with that.
Rabbi, is it typically not recommended to have bread throughout the week? Are you generally supposed to save it for Shabbos, or is it okay?
No. On the contrary, the Gemara speaks about the importance of having bread on a daily basis.
Okay.
Yeah. At the same time, I don't. Right? If I do that, I will become a much bigger person in an unhealthy way than I should be.
You'd be the
So
Rabbi Gadol, right?
I'm sorry.
You'd be the Rabbi Gadol then.
Yes, the wrong kind of gadol. Yes. So yes, right. So that really is something that's a personal preference. But coming back to the point that Rose had made, but if one is going to be having bread, then one should have that at the start of the meal, and that covers throughout the meal. Okay. So again, very, very this comes up quite often, right? So let's just go over this and make sure we have it clear. If I'm sitting down to a meal and then I make my Bari Priya eights, that will cover all Bari Priya eights. Bari Priya Adama, that will cover all Bari Priya Adama, regardless of them being the same or different foods, whether it was in front of me, wasn't in front of me, whether it was I completed the first food and then the other one came out, it doesn't make a difference. When I'm sitting down to a meal, the plan is I'm going to be eating. And therefore, the unspoken da'at intention is this will cover all of those food items of that category. The question comes up when it is a snack, not a meal. So there, the first rule is, if it was in front of you when you made that first bracha, even though I wasn't planning on eating it necessarily, if it was in front of me, it is covered by that first bracha. I do not make another bracha. If it was not in front of me at the time, so then, and also what's very clear is, if I had clear intention with this bracha to cover all other foods, then it does. If I had clear intention not to cover other foods, then it doesn't. Those are all very clear cases. If it was in front of me, don't make other brachas. I had intent to cover the other foods, it will. Had intent not to cover other foods, it won't. What comes up often for us, at least for me, is you go, you have one fruit, you make a blessing on it, and now you want to have some more. It wasn't in front of you at the time of the blessing, and you didn't have any clear intent when you made that bracha. So there we say as follows. If it's more of the same item, you don't make another bracha. You have another clementine and another clementine and another clementine, all the same item, you don't make another bracha. Or if some of the original is left, and now I'm in the middle of eating that first one, I still have a couple of slices of clementine left. Now I'm having some grapes, some cherries, some apple. I do not make another bracha. Why? Because I'm still involved in that first eating. But if there's nothing left of that first one, and now I'm eating something else, this is now a new eating session. And therefore, I will need to make another blessing, another bracha, if I'm having a different type of fruit at this point. The one exception to that is when you come over to my house. And I don't know, maybe someone's teaching me some dance moves. Who knows? Right? And I say, hey, come into the kitchen. let's have a snack. So, and I take out a clementine and I give you Lederal a clementine as a snack. And then you finish that. And then I take out some grapes. There you will not make, even though it's a different item, it's not another clementine, and you didn't have it in mind, and it wasn't out at the time, and there's no clementine left, a guest is different. Because a guest is always thinking, whatever the host brings out, I will have. Right? The guest is not in control of the fridge. And therefore, the unspoken dot thinking of the guest is, whatever comes out, I'll be happy to partake. So therefore, the guest's eating session does not end when they finish that clementine and now something else comes out. That's not a new eating session, because a guest is at the whim and the fancy of the host. And therefore, that's the exception. But otherwise, we follow the rules. By a snack, if A, it was in front of you, or you had intention to eat more, you had intention for anything, no other brachot. Otherwise, if it's the same and you had the same food, more of it, or it's different, but you haven't completed the first one, no other bracha. But if it wasn't in front of you at the time, and it's a different fruit, and you finished the first one, and now you're going for the second one, there you would need to make an additional bracha. Okay, my friends, we'll call it over here and pick up on this next week, Be'ezrat Hashem. All right? Everybody stay healthy and well, and practice your brachot. I want all of you to be experts on making all of these brachot. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Rabbi.
Okay, good night,
Rabbi.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Good night, good
you.
night.
Good
You're very
night.
welcome.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.